Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters, your Magic the Gathering source that helps you command your budget. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCG player affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all their support. Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters studio. I'm your host, Mitch, and joining me today is Eddie.
Hello there.
So, Eddie, we didn't just record an episode, right? This is a completely separate day.
It is,
We would never just stack two episodes on the same day to record to make things easier.
No, I just wear the same shirt.
Just always wear that shirt. I wear this shirt. I changed my hat, though, so obviously This is a different day.
It is.
And with a different day, we have a different topic. And today's topic is the power level problem in Commander.
Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about the problem. So I think that title might be a little bit vague, and let me explain why. Well, actually, I'll tell you kind of the different directions that this episode could go. The first one is power creep in Commander decks being too powerful. Basically, that could be a power level problem, right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Or the difficulty of determining the power level of your deck because it's subjective and therefore impossible to determine a true number, which leads to misrepresenting the effectiveness in your deck in one direction or another, leading to a game where you either stomp or get stomped when playing with people for the first time.
Got it.
Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today, and that's exactly why I kind of had to, trim that just down a little bit in the title to just be the power level problem in Commander instead of all that.
Yeah, I don't think YouTube likes paragraphs for titles.
No, and also for those of you that I talked a bit too fast, basically, it's hard to determine the power level of your deck and to accurately represent it to other players.
Yeah, especially when you're with a group of people you've never played before.
Exactly. I mean, if you're playing with a play group that you've played with for a long time, then, you probably know about what someone's deck is going to be. If you played against that specific deck, you know what it is. If you're playing against another one of their decks that they just built, you probably have a general kind of gauge based on what commander it is and the player that plays it, how powerful it's going to be.
Right. So let's take a step back one step.
Okay.
Why is this a problem?
Well, it's a problem because kind of like how it said at the very end of that giant sentence that I said.
Yeah.
That the problem could be, let's say that we show up to a LGS, when
they open again.
When they open again. And basically, we want to play each other, and we don't know who we are. We don't know who we are. We don't know who the
We have a case of amnesia. There might be bigger problems.
Regardless. Okay, let's say I'm going to be playing against three other people that I've never met before.
Right.
Okay? And I go up and I say, okay, I want to play with this deck. And this deck is about a 6. What decks are you guys playing with? What's a power level of your deck? Oh, this is a 6 too. Okay, I'll pull out my 6. This is my 6 as well.
Yeah, and I got a 7 right here. Sure.
Sure, play. And a 6 and 7. Sure, those can play. That's great.
Yeah.
And so everyone thinks that they're kind of going into it with decks that are around the same power level. And pretty quickly sometimes, or, it might take a little bit other times, you might find out that, my deck is way overpowered and I am stomping these people and it is not fun for anyone. Or the exact opposite. My deck is way underpowered and I'm getting stomped by everyone.
Yeah, that can definitely lead to some feel-bads all around.
Yes, exactly. So that's why it is a problem. Okay, so let's start things off with how players typically perceive power levels. Now, there are a lot of different kind of thoughts about kind of the way to determine the power level of your deck. Again, it is a subjective thing. It is impossible to actually get like a real number on what it is. But in general, I think that many players kind of see it this way. Let's say that most players do a 1 through 10, basically. Yep. So you go up and say, my deck's a 6 or it's an 8 or whatever. So if 5 is the middle of the road kind of commander deck in that scenario, let's say that that's like a kind of a PreCon level, and that might fit the bill. If someone just picks up a PreCon deck, it's not the most powerful thing. It's usually pretty kind of, synergistic, but there are cards in PreCon decks that are just meant to kind of be part of the set and don't really work well in that specific deck. Like maybe there's a commander that they wanted to make, and it fits in those colors, but it doesn't really synergize with that deck at all.
Yeah, they definitely leave room for upgrades in those.
Yep.
For sure.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to keep, harping on this all the time, but please put better ramp in the PreCon decks.
That'd be great.
Thank you. Instead of things that just like search up lands and put them in your hand, like Arcane Astrolabe or whatever it is. No, not that. Whatever. There's one that you sacrifice and you get 2 basics in your hand.
Oh, yeah.
Whatever that thing is.
Yeah, we don't really use it.
Stop putting that in Precons.
Please.
Thank you. Okay. Anyways.
So 5 is like the middle with Precons. Then that leaves 1 to 4 is worse than that. So that leaves like strictly thematic decks that like make a choice that's a negative to the power level for the sake of the theme.
Sure.
So like there's a chair tribal deck that floats around the internet from time to time.
I actually made an episode on that. I think it was on April Fool's Day. Yeah. So that would be like a 1 because literally there's no synergy in that at all, except for the fact that every single creature in the deck or card in the deck features someone or something in a chair.
Right.
Or just a chair on its own or whatnot.
Not known to be very powerful.
No, it's not going to be very powerful. That's what's known to some as a jank deck.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, my rarity deck is a rares only deck, and I would probably consider that to be a 3 or a 4.
Right.
Like it still has some powerful cards in it, some powerful things it can do, but there's a lot of kind of decisions that I made when I was building that. It was in the Jank Lord episode. If you haven't seen them yet, go and check them out. They make fantastic content, Quest for the Jank Lord. And basically, the rule for that deck was you had to build with 79-cent or less cards. And then the rule I made for myself was I am only including rares and mythic rares, essentially. And so because of that, there's a lot of poor decisions I had to make, like running like Phyrexian Lens or whatnot as one of my mana rocks, which is really bad.
What is that, like deal you a damage to make it colorless?
Yeah, it's like cost 3 taps for 1 mana of any color, but you lose 1 life. It's like, oh no.
Feels bad.
It is bad. So so that's like a 3 or a 4. Decks that, aren't quite to pre-con level would probably fit around that. So that's kind of like the 1 to 4 range for many players. On the other side of the spectrum, you've got 9 to 10, and that's going to be CEDH level decks, right? So those are decks that are trying to play at the highest power level. You got your Tinmouth Rathios, you got your turn 2 combo, essentially kind of decks where you're trying to win as quickly and efficiently as possible. So
Yep.
So that leaves, what numbers do we have left? Okay, 5 are precons, 1 to 4 are jank and casual or not casual. If 1 to 4 are jank and maybe flavorful decks, 9 and 10 are more of your CEDH level decks. That leaves us 6 to 8.
Right.
For all the rest
Everyone
of the decks.
else.
And I would say, and this is just kind of me speculating here, I believe that most Commander players are in this range of the type of deck that they want to play. They want to play a casual deck that is more synergistic than a precon because they're actually building it and they're not just including a card, because they need to put it in a set like Wizards does. And basically they want a synergistic deck, but they don't want to get to CEDH level.
Right. And so that's why, as we demonstrated earlier, when you sit down at a table with people that you might not know, you're going to hear 6, 7, or 8 an awful lot as part of what people say their decks are.
And I would say mostly, and I might get to this later actually, mostly 6 or 7 is what you're going to hear. Because players tend to under kind of power level, say a lower power level than what the deck actually is. They try to undervalue the power level of their deck.
Yeah. And there's tons of reasons for this, which we'll get into more detail in a second. And one thing I wanted to mention is that this system that we just talked about is one of, Mitch said, many. And the fact that there are so many means that when you're having this conversation, there's already miscommunication happening just by trying to put a number on things. Because while what we defined as all these numbers, some people might say that only power level 10 is CEDH, 9 isn't even there.
Or maybe, jank decks aren't even included on the list. Maybe there's different ways that different people establish that kind of power number.
Yeah, and some people don't even use numbers. They just want to, say one word. There's, the jank, casual, focused, optimized and competitive, which is another scheme. And like the fact that you have to try to figure out which scheme you're going to use and apply it correctly is incredibly difficult when you're dealing with people that you've never met before.
It's like translating a piece of text like 18 times, like a game of telephone kind of, where you're like, okay, it's this, but it's this and this and this. So.
And throughout the whole thing, like people have a limited amount of time and patience. So it by necessity needs to be a quick decision on what your power level is. And that reduces the amount of detail that you can get in when actually describing what your deck does. So they're kind of
so I can't just go up to someone and ask for their deck, and so I can just look through every single individual card, maybe shuffle up a couple times, do some gold fishing on it, and then maybe determine kind of what the power level might be from there. Couldn't really do that with someone's entire collection.
And so there's some problems with this. So that brings us to our next section.
Which is called, What's the Problem with This?
What's the problem with this? As you already said, power levels are subjective. There's no purely analytical, assign a number to each card in Magic and add them all together, and that's your power level. They interact differently with each other. So, Solemn Simulacrum might be a 3 in one deck, but it's a 5 in another deck.
I think it's a 0 in all decks. So
also a valid point. And so there's really no escaping the fact that it is subjective. So that's why this is a problem that continually comes up in the community.
Absolutely.
Time and time again.
2 players can literally build the exact same deck card for card and have a different kind of perspective on what the power level of that deck is.
Right.
It's gonna be different depending on your play group, depending on who you're playing with. Like maybe, in one play group, your deck smashes. It's great. I'm winning every game. And maybe in a different play group, that same deck would just get stomped. So it depends. You might have a completely different perception of that. I think you had an idea of basically we should rate some of each other's decks, basically. So before this episode started, we each, without the other one seeing it, wrote down numbers next to these commander names, and we're going to share them with you. So basically, I'm going to evaluate 2 of Eddie's decks, and he's going to evaluate 2 of mine. And we're going to kind of compare where we think our power levels are.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll have different numbers to demonstrate how power level is a problem.
We might have the same because
we have the exact same numbers.
We play the same play group and we play each other's decks a decent amount of time, so we might come up with the same number. And I think we have a similar way that we evaluate power levels. So
that's true.
This might be a very bad experiment where it's like, wait, no, it's perfect. Everyone knows what a power level is.
All right, so we're going to start with one of Mitch's decks. It's one that he had an episode on, the deck that he almost never plays anymore.
Yep.
And that's because it tends to solitaire. It's very powerful. It is Joyra.
Everyone loves solitaire.
Yeah. So I've actually played against this deck a few times, so I've got a good feel for it. When I thought about your Joyra deck, we're going with the 1 through 10 scale here. I think it's pretty good, not quite CEDH level, so I gave it a 7.
See, and I gave this one an 8 because this is one that I would literally only pull out against near CEDH level decks. And actually, it is also kind of a thing where when I first built that, I thought it was a 7. And then kind of playing it more and more and more, I'm like, well, compared to my other decks, if I put some other ones at a 7, then this has to be an 8. So that's, I would say, 7.5 if we're going to go like, but then that just is another thing. Like some people say 7.5, and it's like,
75% was a very common thing a few years ago.
Exactly. So I had it at an 8. So again, so good. We're different on the first one. That's perfect. Different. Okay, so let's go with, are you going to go with one of mine again?
Yeah, let's go with one of mine. So we've talked about how I have a problem with Simic decks, and the encapsulation of that is my Rashmi deck.
Yes, it is.
So what would you rate my Rashmi deck at?
See, your Rashmi deck, okay, again, this is kind of the thing, like, it is an incredibly powerful deck. Like, that. The only time that I will ever pull out Joyra is when you pull out Rashmi. That is pretty much it. And so I evaluate yours as probably about an 8. Like, it's just under CEDH level. It could probably compete with a CEDH deck.
on the right, I've played with it against CEDH decks, and like it is definitely not like super meta for CEDH right now. But
25 counterspells.
I also gave Rashmi an 8, so we are aligned here.
We agreed on that one. Perfect. All right.
Perfect.
How about my Galta deck? So Galta vehicles.
I love this deck.
It's a flavorful deck. It is. It is. There's some flavor to it, but there's also some punch to it as well. So what did you say my Galta deck was?
I gave your Galta vehicles deck this one I actually changed. I scribbled it out. At first I gave it a 6. But I went to 5 for Galta.
And that's kind of where I see it around, like, again, 5.5. But I have it down as a 6, again, because of the initial criteria of if this is better than a Precon, then it is a 6, which I do believe that is better than a Precon. It does have synergy to it. You can get a lot of wolves. You can get 24 wolves on a turn. It's great.
It was a problem.
It was fun.
It was great.
Okay, and then the last one is your Marchesa deck.
Yeah, Queen Marchesa.
So Queen Marchesa. This deck I played against a ton of times. You love politics.
I do. I love
You
this
love
deck.
politics deck. And this Marchesa deck is definitely the queen of politics. I would say that deck is a 7. Is what I had.
7. Okay, we got a bit of a difference here. I actually have it as a 5.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And the reason for that is like I do play it politically, so I maybe make plays that aren't super optimal, but earn curry me favor, hopefully, with a person that receives them.
Yeah. Well, I think that I think actually that's kind of the deck that the power level of that deck I think is more defined on who plays it, because if you're playing it in a political way, you can utilize it to kind of beat decks. It can punch up, essentially. Like you can beat decks that are above it in power level because of the way that you play with politics. If you're a terrible political person like I am, who when that one extra turns episode with the Kenrith deck, which was supposed to be politics, didn't politic at all, and then became the arch enemy far too quickly, then you might be terrible playing the Marchesa deck. So it might then be a 5.
Yeah. So I mean, this goes to show like we do play with each other an awful lot. We've seen these decks many times.
Yeah.
And like we were in the same realm overall, and we've talked about power level with each other and just extemporaneously an awful lot, and we still had differences.
Yeah. I 100%. Yeah. I'm glad that we didn't end up with the same numbers on that, actually. It was good.
Yep.
Yeah, so basically, from my experience, again, I mentioned this before, most players, the majority of players, when you're going up to, an LGS table and you just ask, okay, what deck what power level are you playing? Oh, 6 or 7, basically is kind of what they assign to their deck. 6, 7, or 8 is pretty much all you're going to hear, number one. Because again, if someone says 9, you're like, well, you should probably play that with the CEDH folks because my deck is not going to be able to compete. Generally. And if someone else is playing, a 1, then I'll pull out my rarity deck for funsies. But
yeah, and like for example, if someone says like a confident, like my deck's at least a 7, maybe more, it's really good. I might be like, I haven't played Rashmi in a while. Like, she might be too good, but, this guy's, feeling pretty good about his deck, so let's play.
Yep.
And then we might end up in that experience where, like, I've countered everything they've tried to do and they regret their life.
And they're having no fun.
Yeah, and it's just like those types of feel-bads that can cause some of the miscommunication, the problems that we're trying to explain in Commander and try to help you guys avoid.
Absolutely. Yeah, so it's definitely a problem where, there's a wide variety of power levels in Commander. Like there's from one deck to another, there's a wide variety from, the most casual decks to the most powerful decks. When you're outside of, PreCon levels and outside of CDH levels, there's a giant gap between those two, essentially. And trying to fill that with 3 numbers is impossible, basically.
Yeah.
Where you're not going to be able to articulate kind of the power level of your deck and make someone else understand, basically, with just having those 3 numbers as your kind of, baseline, basically. I said that in a very terrible way, I'm sure.
Yeah, and so let's talk about a few ways we can mitigate like this particular problem. We've got a few of them down here. One that I think is useful is to address the issue that when people are thinking of their deck as a 6, 7, or 8, I know like it feels a little bit bad when you say that your deck is like a 3. Like you've said, your deck's like a 3. A lot of people would build a deck and they've put like so much time and effort into it and they love it and they know like in the perfect scenario it can really get going.
In that Christmas Wonderland. It's
yes. And so like because of that, they're like, I think it's probably a 6, like this rarity deck. When in actuality, like it's probably a 3 if you're being honest with yourself. And I don't think there's a problem with that.
No.
I have a few decks that like if I'm playing with a new group of people and they're either fairly new to Magic or want to play just a super casual game, awesome. I'm all for it. But I'm going to leave Rashmi in the box and I'm going to bust out my super budget Gerard Golgari Lich Lord deck. Like, you kind of want to meet the table where they're at. And so like I'm happy to say Gerard is like a 3 or 4 at best. Like it's totally fine with me that my deck is subpar. And I think that's one mindset that a lot of people need to kind of embrace, the fact that they have some 3 and 4 decks.
And not that you need a ton of Commander decks, to have fun, but it's always a good idea to have a couple of different leveled power decks, basically, so that no matter what the scenario that you're in, if you're at that, Command Fest or whatnot, and there's a group of newer players who are looking to play with lower power decks, then you can still, have a deck to play with instead of being like, well, I'm just going to pull out Golos and stomp you all and it'll be fun for no one. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go into the next point, which is just kind of like in my own kind of experience with my own decks, right? I've got 9 decks in my collection at this point, and they definitely vary in power level. Again, Rarity wasn't built to be, synergistic. It was, there's synergy to it, but it wasn't built to be better than a Precon. It was built with like these kind of, wacky kind of restrictions with it, so that's why it is the way it is. The other 8 were built to be synergistic, but again, not to the level of CDH territory, which I don't think you can even do really on a restricted budget of $50. I don't think you can make a CDH deck. I could be wrong on that. Please correct me, CDH people.
Yeah, but, there's definitely, I think it comes down to the fact that you can build some competitive EDH decks on a budget. But when you talk about budget, it means different things in those contexts. Like you can build a Godo deck, which really just needs ramp and Godo and Helm of the Host, and you win. And you can build that on a fairly tight budget. We're talking like $100 still for the most part. Like building on what we would call budget for Commander's Quarters or for a lot of people, like $25 to $50 that you have laying around. Like if you try to build a deck on that budget and bring it to a group of people that want to play competitively, it's going to be hard to hang. You're going to be missing a lot of the stuff they would have. You
very well might get smashed. But yeah, so kind of even in my own kind of collection, right, there's a huge gap between the lowest of my decks, which is probably my Galta deck is probably more of a fun, casual deck that can still be very synergistic and do a lot of cool things, and my Joyra deck, which is just oppressively synergistic and just makes really long turns. So calling one a 6 and one an 8 does not really illustrate the gap between those two decks. I would never play my Joyra deck against my Galta deck. Like, it would just get stomped.
And so we're trying to have these numbers ideally say that if these decks were at the same number and we're head to head, they would win 50% of the time.
And that's we're never going to be able to get to that point.
No, and like a 6 to an 8, like let's say Galta versus Joyra, that kind of makes you feel like Galta has a chance.
And I hate to tell you, for those of you that did buy the Galta deck, if you try to play against that Joyra deck, you're not going to have a chance. A very slim chance, I should say.
And so it's not a strictly the power level system is not going to serve your purposes if you look at it that way.
Yep. But let's talk about we kind of mentioned other systems, right? There are other ways to talk about this. And one that does come up is the turn discussion system.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So the turn discussion system, basically, I believe it helps, but it is not perfect. So the turn discussion is basically what if your deck is playing on its own? You're goldfishing, you're playing on its own, and there are no players interacting with you. On what turn can you generally expect to win with it?
Sure.
Right? And so I think this is a decent solution, yes, because that generally can demonstrate power level. It generally can. But let's give an example, okay? Maybe a control deck, right? A control deck inherently is going to win at a slower pace. It is working to control the board. It is working to slow people down. And then at some point, it is going to build up to its win. And its win con might not be like, an automatic win right away. It might be a more kind of elongated over time kind of win. So maybe that control deck can win very consistently and be very powerful, but doesn't win till turn 11. And that doesn't illustrate how powerful that is versus like I brought my $15 Yargle deck, which is a Voltron deck, which can kill someone on turn 3 with the perfect hand or whatnot, and can, probably, I would say, win around turn 7 is probably about around where it would win on its own without anyone else doing anything to stop it. It could win around turn 7 or 8 generally. It's not going to be more powerful than that control deck.
Yeah, it's the turn discussion can be useful in a vacuum, but it doesn't accurately illustrate like how Yargle is going to play in reality. It doesn't have trample, I don't think.
It does not.
No,
It
it's
is
in
a
black.
9/3 vanilla.
9/3 vanilla.
It is very vanilla.
And so like in reality, not gonna win on turn.
But if there's no interaction, then you can probably win with that turn 7, 8 very consistently because no one's blocking. I just hit you for 9 damage. Next turn, double strike, add a little bit more, 21 damage, you're dead.
Yep.
So basically, so the turn discussion does help, but it's not perfect. So now let's move on to the final point though with how can this be solved?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Is this possible to solve even? The answer is no. I mean, obviously, we kind of spent this entire time talking about how power levels are subjective, and it's impossible to kind of even determine your own deck's power level, like actual power level. Not necessarily even just trying to compare them to other players. Basically, I think that the main thing that you can do, though, is give more context. And I think that is a really important thing to do. I think the first question that you can even just ask is, hey, is everyone here to play Casual Commander and not CDH? That's a good kind of first question, because if people want to play CDH, great. If you got a CDH deck, use it. If not, kind of, okay, we're not to the CDH level. We're just below that, or well below that. The second question is, hey, are everyone's decks here more powerful than precons? That's kind of like precons are, again, good decks. They can be good. They can be, synergistic. But again, there are certain kind of imperfections just built in those decks, by wizards, intentionally or unintentionally, by adding in, certain cards that the deck doesn't need, or, not giving you ramp cards for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So basically kind of if those two questions are, yes and yes, then kind of as a baseline, everyone is here to play Casual Commander, more powerful than Precon. And that is a kind of good starting point to get to. And I think that the majority of Commander decks, I would say, from what I've experienced, is that the majority of decks fall underneath that kind of, that level, better than Precon, not CDH.
Right.
For the most part. And I'd say that you can try to assume that, but it's better to kind of, still have that discussion so that you don't end up at a point where you're stopping a rarity deck.
Really, if you're at one end of the spectrum or the other and have those two decks in the same pot, it's not going to be fun for those folks.
Absolutely. And I think that it's an easier way to people also might not understand, what a casual deck is versus a jank deck versus a competitive deck. I sent out a poll a while back, basically kind of, how many people are playing competitive decks? And I had a lot of people kind of asking, well, what do you mean by competitive deck? And so some people aren't necessarily even aware that, CDH, when you're saying competitive, just pretty much just means just CDH. It doesn't mean like, oh, I've got a really good casual deck. It's like, no, if you're saying competitive, generally people will think that that's competitive, CDH. But, sometimes people don't understand that either. So again, there's just kind of like there's a lot of questions I think that might need to ask, again, people have, the amount of time that they can spend, asking all these questions might be limited, but I think a couple of quick questions could be very helpful for this. So I think, Eddie, you've got a good point that you brought up about kind of talking about your deck in particular.
Yeah, so when you're talking about decks, there's a couple things that I want to point out. Number one, as you'll see on most deck tech videos, they'll say, here's the deck, here's the game plan, and here's how we're going to win with it. You don't necessarily need to reveal each card that's in your win condition.
Yeah.
But if you just tell the table like, hey, I'm playing my Rick Smithy's deck, I'm going to be playing really big green and blue spells and just hope I get enough value to win.
To really obnoxious things.
Absolutely obnoxious. That'll at least like tell people that, that's going to be above PreCon, where, Orcs and Thieves is not a CEDH commander, so that informs their decision.
Yep.
And then the other thing is, it's totally okay if either you or your opponent are a little bit hesitant to give too much information out, especially if it's the first time you've played with each other. Because if you're playing a deck that relies on a combo, you say like, oh, I'm going to win with Isochron Scepter or whatever.
Yeah.
Number one, you're playing CEDH. But not necessarily. But number two, you are saying, if you see this card, you need to be worried.
You need to counter it right away.
Yeah.
Versus maybe someone doesn't know.
And that's not necessarily fair to you or your opponent if that's the kind of deck
Sure.
that they're playing. And so
maybe just kind of being more simple, saying, I plan on, maybe it's a control deck and I'm planning on comboing to win. Maybe. That might be a more fair way to kind of go about it versus, this is specifically the cards you need to remove in my deck in order to stop me.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, in all honesty, like no system can ever solve this issue. And the problem with the entire issue is that it's completely subjective. Like power level is subjective no matter how kind of you split it, however many kind of variables you try to kind of eliminate when it comes to people kind of saying what their power level is. It's just completely subjective. Everyone's got a different kind of mentality on how powerful their deck is compared to others. Again, in one play group, my decks could get stomped. In another play group, my decks could just absolutely stomp people. So it's going to change based off of so many factors that it's impossible to come down to an actual number of how powerful your deck is.
Yeah, and there's some other issues with that as well. Number one, as we've said, Commander is 100 card singleton. It's a game of variance. One game, your traditionally really powerful deck could totally get stomped by a PreCon.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it could happen. And so, like, over time, you'll get a better feel, like, once you get a kind of better average.
Yep.
But even if you know that your deck is powerful, it can still totally whiff. And this is multiplayer.
Yes.
So just kind of getting in the ballpark is what we want to aim for.
Even if you do get a bit too far ahead, the other players can knock you down.
Yeah. Hopefully there's some threat assessment and some politics that can be had to even the playing field, even if one deck is really, really humming.
Yeah. And I think that's really what makes Commander work. Is it ever going to be perfect? Is there ever going to be, everyone's got exactly 6s, and now we can play together because we have exactly 6s. No, like it's never gonna happen where you have exactly equal decks, where you win 25% of the time, you win 25% of the time, just kind of as it is. But Commander is a casual format where you can politic. Yeah, you can kind of make deals. You can knock that player down who's getting a bit too far ahead. So it does even out, which is perfect.
It's great. Yeah, and I would say, at least for me, when in doubt, if you're watching this, you're a pretty entrenched Commander player. You know the format. You're good at this.
Or you just really like the sound of our voices.
It's possible. I can't blame you. So when in doubt, bring a lower powered deck is my motto. Because I would much rather lose and know that like I brought a fair deck than have the situation where, someone said their deck's an 8, so I'm playing Rashmi, and then I completely, ruin their hopes and dreams.
Yeah.
I'm not really the type of player that likes to pull punches, so I would much rather have someone earn the win.
Yes.
Or, if that is the case and they were playing a powerful deck, like I'm happy to lose, and then the next game I can adjust for that and bring out a stronger deck if we're playing another game.
Maybe start off with bringing a knife to a gunfight instead of a bazooka to the gunfight.
Yeah. I think in general that'll, as long as you're feeling good about it, you're happy to like accept the loss if you lose, it'll be a better experience for the players, and everyone's gonna have a good time.
Maybe that's how we should define it, right? Okay, is your deck a gun, a knife, or a bazooka? That's the perfect solution.
Yep, perfect.
Probably a terrible way to go about it.
Yeah, I don't think most LGSs would encourage that verbiage.
So. No, I don't think so. Do not do that. Keep it with numbers or whatever way that you have found.
That'll make a lot of judges concerned. He has a knife, get him.
But yeah, the whole point of this kind of last part of it was basically giving more context is only going to help.
Yeah.
Unless you're lying about the context, then that hurts. So don't lie.
Yeah, and it depends on the venue. If you're like at a Magic Fest and you really only have an hour to play the whole game, like you might need to abbreviate it, do your best, and just try to have fun with it no matter what happens.
And if people make mistakes, in evaluating their own deck versus what there's going to be if they end up stomping you, that's okay. They'll adjust the next game, and that's fine. People are human; they're going to make mistakes.
Yep. So the power level problem, it's not going to ever be truly solved, but you can certainly change your approach on it and how you perceive it, and help the table out to have a fun game.
We could be wrong, Eddie, because I'm about to ask all you listening out there to comment and let me know how you personally would solve the power level problem. So maybe there is a solution and we just haven't found it yet. and you have the solution. So comment below and let us know what
Share
that
it with
is.
the world. Yeah.
Let us know. And then we will let everyone else know how wrong we were in a future episode because you solved it. Yeah. But anyways, thanks for joining me today, Eddie.
You got it.
And as always, thanks again and have a good one.